now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. It has been called the world's largest social experiment. China's one-child policy was in effect for 40 years until last week, when, amid much fanfare, Beijing announced a new two-child per family policy. It's been hailed as a great advancement by some, a continuing scourge by others. Joining us to discuss is China watcher and human rights activist and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, Reggie Littlejohn. Reggie, thanks for returning to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. Now, what drove this decision? Surely not human rights.
No, it is not that the Chinese Communist Party has suddenly developed a conscience or grown a warm heart towards women and children at all. It's that they are facing a threefold demographic disaster. Number one of which is the fact that, that they don't have enough women. Because of the gender side, the sex-selective abortion that happens under the one-child policy. So, no, this has nothing to do with human rights whatsoever. And something I really want the listeners to understand is the fact that a two-child policy carries all of the terrible and appalling methods of enforcement as the one-child policy. It's just they start killing after two instead of after one.
I want to play something. This summer I spoke with the human rights activist Chen Guochen, the blind lawyer as he's known popularly, about this one-child policy. He defended so many of the victims of this policy. Listen.
I can give you an example. During the 6 months period in my hometown Linyi County, and there were about 130,000 women were enforced abortion, which affect more than 600,000 family members, and some of them died of such a kind of brutality and beating and those kind of things. There are many complaints from those people affected by this kind of large-scale abuse of power and forced abortion to the provincial and high-ranking officers, but they were all silenced and they were all forbidden from the media reporting.
Do you expect that silencing to change, this control on the message and the victims of what's happened here?
Oh, absolutely not. In the case of Feng Jianmei, for example, she's the one who was forcibly aborted at 7 months in 2012, and there was a picture of her with her forcibly aborted baby. Her family, she and her family endured terrible repercussions because she allowed that photograph to be posted on the internet. And people who get their stories to the West, not only do they have to endure the trauma of the forced abortion itself, but they have to endure trauma of themselves and their families from the Chinese Communist Party for shaming them before the world.
People don't realize, I think, the gravity, the expanse of this one-child policy. Since 1980, it's estimated, and these are estimates, probably low estimates, they estimate 400 million births have been stopped, murders have been committed. 400 million Chinese citizens dead. Is that the number that you hold to, or do you think it's larger?
Well, it's larger now because that number, 400 million, was a number from the Chinese Communist Party, and it's about 5 years old now. So the number is larger. 400 million lives prevented. Go ahead.
And how do they enforce it? Tell me how they enforce it. Besides the forced abortions, it's much wider. It's much worse than just the forced abortions.
Right. So this is something that the listeners really need to understand, is that the core of the policy is not whether the Chinese Communist Party allows a woman to have one child or two children. It's that they're setting a limit and they're enforcing it through forced abortion, forced sterilization, forced contraception, and this whole web of surveillance of women. And just monitoring women's menstrual cycles and their fertility. All of that infrastructure of coercion and surveillance will remain the same under a two-child policy, just like it was under the one-child policy.
Here's the big question. Okay, they've changed it now to 2 children per family. Clearly because they've got an aging population.
That's right.
The workforce is dwindling.
That's
they
right.
know they can't sustain this thing for very much longer.
That's right.
Does this policy change from 1 child to 2, does it really fix what ails China due to this 40 years of the one-child policy?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, even if China were to completely abolish the one-child policy right now and let everybody have as many kids as they want to have, It would not fix it because it's going to take 20 years for the women to grow to the point where they can marry, and for everybody to grow up to the point where they can be workers. So they've dug themselves into a hole that they cannot get out of.
It's estimated that there are 33 million more men than women in China. This, of course, is a huge problem. Does this two-child policy, do you think it might decrease the number of girls aborted? Because these families can only have one child, they want that male heir, so they kill their girls. This has been your lifetime work, protecting these women. We've seen this gender side. Will this blunt its effects, if not stop it?
No, it will not. I mean, it might have a minor impact, but already in the countryside, there's a two-child policy. So if a woman gives birth to a girl, she can have a second child, and these women, they see this as being their last chance to have a boy, so they routinely abort the girls. And that's where we have our Save a Girl campaign, where we have saved about 200 of these baby girls. So that's great. But what they have found is that even under an expanded two-child policy, right before they made this change, if one member of a couple was an only child, they could have a second child. Far fewer people applied to have that second child. That's why they're moving to a two-child policy, a universal two-child policy. Why? Because it's too expensive to have a child in China. So what I think is going to happen is those who have a boy first are going to stop at one. They're not going to have that second child. And then those who have a girl first are going to continue to abort that second daughter because they still want to have a son. So I do not expect the numbers of gendercide to be plummeting immediately.
I was amazed at the fines. I didn't realize the onerous fines applied to people who did violate the one-child policy. $315 billion since 1980, according to The Economist. Again, that's probably a lowball number. That's an estimate.
Well, and that's the reason I think, one of the reasons I think that China will never abandon coercive population control.
Too much money in it.
It's a huge moneymaker for them, that $315 billion. And this is all sort of like the wild, wild west, where it depends on which family planning official shows up at your door, how much the fine is going to be. There's no accounting for where those fines go, so it can just line the pockets of the local officials.
Do you think this will do anything to stop or slow down the sex trade in China, which is booming because you don't have any girls in the country? They're importing these women from other countries.
Again, I don't think it's going to have a major impact at all because, first of all, it's going to take 20 years for any girls born to reach the age of sexual maturity. And then beyond that, like I said, I don't think it's going to be reducing gendercide to any significant amount.
Aren't you amazed that when you see, I mean, this is far more than a social experiment. This is a social tragedy. And when you begin to monkey around and play with such an important part of nature, its natural progression, life, when you start moving that, the repercussions, the consequences are so far-reaching. Economic, demographic, and now you see it reaching, this threatens Chinese culture going forward, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, because Chinese traditional culture is very family-oriented. The Chinese traditionally have loved children. That's why they had such a problem, because under the Mao era, the women were having 6 kids per woman. And so, and the whole structure has been where the young people support their parents and support their grandparents. It's all very family-oriented. And then to just cut that off in one generation and mandate one child, and then those only children, a lot of them have only had one child. So many people have never grown up with an extended family, and it's a complete rupture of the social structure of China.
So what do you think happens now? What are your contacts on the ground telling you?
Well, first of all, the one-child this next move does not even take place until April. So, for example, there is a woman right now who is illegally pregnant with her second child, and even though China has announced this coming two-child policy,
nothing's changed yet.
Nothing's changed for her. She's faced with a huge fine or the possibility of a forced abortion, and she is trying to get out of the country. So, as Congressman Chris Smith said today, he will believe it when he sees it. The Chinese Communist Party often says they're going to do things and they don't do them, or they just don't get implemented in the villages. I will tell you that in my villages, where my Save a Girl campaign is, people are not being overjoyed and thinking they're going to have a second child because
they know this regime.
They know the regime, and they also know the local family planning officials, and they don't think that there's going to be change anytime soon.
Ted Cruz mentioned you on the floor of the Senate this week. That was nice.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah, thank God for Ted Cruz, also Marco Rubio, also Congressman Chris Smith, all three of them have come out with very, very powerful statements saying basically that the two-child policy does not fix any of the problems with the one-child policy. And I'm so glad that they and you are getting the truth out there.
Reggie Littlejohn, thank you for being here.
Thank
Great
you for
to
having
see
me.
you. You can follow the work of Reggie Littlejohn at womensrightswithoutfrontiers.org.